from the BBC World Service. One question, 4 expert witnesses, and an answer. We often talk about the problem of climate change in the context of wildfires, floods, and damage to buildings and crops. But another, less well-explored risk is that rising temperatures allow fungal diseases to spread to parts of the globe that were previously too cold for them to survive. New research by Manchester University in the UK suggests that a killer fungus that infects millions of people a year in hotter countries may soon spread through Europe as the world continues to warm. The Aspergillus species, which can cause deadly lung infections and is already estimated to kill around 1.8 million people globally each year, is forecast to spread northwards from Africa and South America. The warning has echoes of the science fiction TV show The Last of Us, which dramatizes the threat. It depicts a terrifying brain-altering fungus that wipes out vast swathes of the population, creating a zombie apocalypse. Experts say the drama vastly exaggerates the risk, but there are still very real concerns about the rise in fungal diseases. This week on The Inquiry, we're asking, can we stop killer fungi? Part 1. The fungus and
So fungal pathogens are all around us. I mean, you can find them in soil, they are dispersed in the outdoor air, spreading over miles and miles probably. And we are exposed to those fungi the whole day.
Our first expert witness is Adelia Morris, Professor in Pediatric Infectious Diseases and the co-director of the MSc Centre for Medical Mycology at the University of Exeter in the United Kingdom. So how would you define a fungal disease?
Fungal diseases are diseases caused by fungal pathogens, and they cause infections like other pathogens are doing, bacterial pathogens and viruses. So a fungal disease can be ranging from mild annoying diseases like athlete's foot as an example, to life-threatening infections causing bloodstream infections or brain infections who can be fatal.
But let's start with the type of fungal infection we're more familiar with.
A fungus can also infect our skin or our nails, and that is fungus from the environment finding a niche on our skin or in between our toes. The athlete's foot is the most common example for a fungal toenail, and just finds a habitat it grows out in, and thereby causing disease.
Our feet are welcoming to fungus because there are cracks where the fungal cells can invade the skin. It's dark in there and frankly a bit sweaty, especially under socks and shoes. But whilst fungus on our feet and under our nails doesn't look very nice, it's not a threat to our health. But a different type of fungus, mold pathogens, when breathed into our lungs, are a different matter, especially if our immune system is already on the back foot.
Those pathogens, they release their spores from the environment in the air, and a very common route of infecting people is by inhalation, and the spores will enter the lungs, and the lung is a perfect environment if the immune defenses are low, or if there is a other lung condition, that this spore can germinate into what are thread-like structures, which will grow into the lung tissue and cause disease.
So why is it that sometimes they infect us and other times they don't?
Yeah, that's a good question. First of all, there needs to be exposure, and there needs to be the conditions for the fungus to feel itself happy to grow and to cause disease. Now, the more severe fungal diseases are not seen in healthy human beings. The fungus is taking a underlying diseases compromising their lung health or compromising their immune systems.
The other main group of fungi out there isn't something that lands on our bodies or that we breathe in. In fact, it's already inside us. And that type of fungus is yeast. The most well-known example is Candida albicans, and it's part of our normal human flora.
You will find this yeast by many healthy people in our gut, and it's just helping to have a good gut health together with a number of bacteria in the gut. But sometimes those candida can then lead in patients who are in hospitals to invasive infections. They go from the gut to the bloodstream and cause bloodstream infections.
Why might they enter the bloodstream?
They might enter the bloodstream because the immune defenses are low, or there is damage to organs, either through trauma or by surgical procedures. People undergoing major abdominal surgery are at risk for candidemia due to the fact that the gut might be open during the surgery to treat the underlying condition, and that could then lead to anatomical barriers being disrupted, and therefore the candida can see a chance to come into the bloodstream. If a fungus enters the bloodstream, the patient will develop a comparable picture to what bacteria can do, as septicemia. And that's a severe disease what is seen in patients admitted to hospitals, patients at intensive care units. So yeah, that fungi should not be in the bloodstream.
Many of these fungi are already around us. So the question is, why are they presenting more problems now? Time for our second expert witness.
Part 2. A perfect storm. My name is Rita Oladile, a clinical microbiologist at the Lagos University Teaching Hospital in Lagos, Nigeria. I'm also a professor of clinical microbiology at the University of Lagos.
How worried do you think we should be about fungal diseases?
Very worried. I think we should be very worried, and more especially after our experience with the pandemic caused by COVID-19, and there seems to be an increasing number of fungal infections more than before. Is it that we're better at identifying them, and that's why? So I think global warming has a role also to play. These organisms thrive well with increased temperatures, so you have emerging pathogens coming up. It's a whole myriad of things, but it is happening. We should be worried.
One of the factors causing the rise is that global temperatures are going up, and we'll come back to the effect that is having a little later in part 3. But let's first talk about medical advances, what they've done to our life expectancy, and why that might leave us overexposed.
But one of the reasons why there's a rise is because healthcare delivery has improved significantly. So critically ill patients, vulnerable patients, immunocompromised patients can live longer, right? We have some better drugs, we have some better healthcare delivery. So as the improvement in healthcare delivery, it also gives a parallel increase in the population that is at risk of opportunistic infections, fungal infections. The other thing also is that we then also have rising numbers of patients at risk of this disease. We now do more transplants of practically every organ now. So you have patients with cancers having chemotherapy, anything that brings the immune system that makes a patient to be at risk of fungal infections. We have things like steroids being used for longer periods in patients to treat disease. Patients that have long-term steroid use will be at risk of fungal infections, which is very
Across the world, the ability from global north to the global south, for example, varies enormously in terms of the ability to diagnose and deal with these diseases.
There's quite disparity in the ability to make diagnosis and properly manage patients that risk or have serious fungal infections. availability of diagnostics which are not available. There's also the challenge of the availability and accessibility of antifungal drugs. Sub-Saharan Africa accounts for a significant proportion of patients that have HIV/AIDS. Despite the higher burden of the problem of these diseases being in the global south, all this will further drive migration because people will seek better care elsewhere because there's none of it at home.
Fungal infections are certainly more prevalent in warmer climates, especially where many more people are infected with the disease HIV/AIDS, which damages the immune system. But global warming means we're also seeing a rise in the northern hemisphere. Time for our third expert witness.
Part 3. Changing temperatures.
As the world warms, the distribution of fungal species will change in the planet. The possibility exists that we're going to be getting more fungal diseases in areas where we currently don't have them.
Our third expert witness is Arturo Casadevall, a professor and chair of molecular microbiology and immunology at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health in the United States.
We know that life adapts, life survives. So the fear is that as the world gets warmer, many of the fungi that are out there that have the capacity to cause disease, for example, in plants and in insects, which are room temperature organisms, will be able to survive at higher temperatures. And if that is the case, we will see fungal diseases that are currently not known to medicine.
Climate change is an important consideration when we try to predict how fungi will spread across the globe in the future. Another is that fungi vary as to the type of conditions they prefer.
Humidity is a major factor for the fungi because think about concrete. Think about where you find mushrooms. You find them on the forest after the rain. Fungi need a lot of water, and they thrive in high humidity environments. So one of the things is that global warming in some places is going to bring deserts. In other places it's going to bring more rain. Both will affect the fungi. For example, we have a fungus in the United States that causes disease known as Coccidioides immitis. It is found in the southwest, in the desert. But as the United States deserts expand, the range of these organisms expands. So I think humidity is going to be a major variable, and as we know, humidity is greatly affected by air temperature and thus will be affected by climate change.
Professor Casadevall's team has been conducting research in Baltimore, where Johns Hopkins University is based, by looking at different areas of the city to try to model how the reach of fungal diseases will change.
We're trying to understand how this will happen. So a cooler neighborhood is one in which, for example, there are lots of trees. There's a lot of grass. And the warmer neighborhoods are neighborhoods in which there are few trees, a lot of concrete, and the differences in temperature can be significant, 4 or 5 degrees centigrade on average. And the fungi from the warmer neighborhoods are more hormone resistant, more heat resistant than the ones from the cooler neighborhoods. So what that's telling you is within a city, we're beginning to see fungal adaptation. And if this is happening within a city, we think that it's happening all throughout the globe.
So that's the effect of the changing environment outside. But there's also another temperature change occurring, and that is inside our bodies. In the past, we've been too warm for fungi to prosper easily. But in the last few decades, we've been getting cooler.
We are very well protected against fungi by the fact that we have an advanced immune system. We have a backbone. All animals with a backbone have advanced immune system. But we also have high temperatures. Our basal temperature of 37 degrees is so hot that it keeps out most of the fungal species. They simply cannot replicate. are our temperatures. This is why when people get fungal diseases, they get them in the skin. Like, for example, nail fungal diseases, that's a cool area. Or in the toes, in something like athlete's foot. Those are cooler areas of the body.
But, says Professor Casadevall, our bodies are on average 1 degree lower than they were 100 years ago. And that changes their susceptibility to fungal diseases. Here is one example.
And the good hypothesis is that back then, people suffered a lot more. For example, they may have been foreigners with wars in their gut. Many of them have been infected with organisms like tuberculosis. And any inflammation drives some temperature. So they've been living in a higher inflammatory state. And as modern medicine has cured us of many of these diseases, and as we live in a cleaner environment, our levels of inflammation have gone down, and therefore our temperatures have gone down.
So our body temperatures are on average lower than a century ago because we suffer far less from infections that cause our immune systems to kick in. Meanwhile, the world is getting hotter. All this leaves us with the question, how can we protect ourselves? Time for our final expert witness.
Part 4. Fighting back.
The group of antifungal treatments most widely used are called azoles. They work by interfering with how fungal cells function and grow. Azoles are used to treat various fungal infections, and they're also widely used in agriculture to protect crops. The problem is that because we use them so much, fungi are adapting to evade them. Michael Bromley is a professor in fungal diseases at the University of Manchester in the UK.
So we have a little bit of a problem with drug resistance with a number of fungal diseases. So the primary treatments that are used for the treatment of many of the fungal diseases that we see in the clinic are the azole class of antifungals. We see resistance emerging quite rapidly to these compounds, and the reason that they seem to be developing resistance is the presence of fungicides in the environment. So this is the use of fungicides in crop protection products to stop fungal pathogens from infecting plants.
The widespread agricultural use of azoles is now seen as the driving force for much of the clinical resistance of fungi. The Aspergillus fungus is known for its impact on food spoilage and decomposition.
There's around about 10,000 tons of azole fungicides sprayed on crops in the European Union every year. And Aspergillus, it lives in the soil and it lives in compost heaps. And because of that, it's a bystander in terms of its exposure to these azole fungicides. So the farms aren't using azoles to kill Aspergillus, but it's just there at the same time. And because it's exposed to this fungicide, it develops the ability to cope with its presence. It becomes resistant. And because these azole fungicides are similar to the azoles that we use in the clinic, they become resistant to those too.
So how do we deal with that problem?
Some would argue that we just ban the azole fungicides from use in crop protection. However, it would create a significant alternative problem, and that's because these fungicides are used for crop protection, the yields of our crops would go down, and the European Union have estimated that if we stop using the azoles, what would happen is that we would no longer be able to self-sustain production of food for the European Union.
But Professor Bromley has something up his sleeve. He's researching alternative treatments.
We've had some real success recently in developing new compounds, and there are some really exciting drugs close to emerging in clinical use now. So it works by inhibiting DNA synthesis. And DNA is important for our cells when they divide and for all the inheritable traits in our cells, and the same for fungal cells. So if we disrupt the function of DNA synthesis. What we stop is the ability of the cells to divide, and if the cells stop dividing, then ultimately they will die.
And there's another approach. Fosmanogepix is a groundbreaking antifungal agent, effective against yeasts as well as molds. It works differently from other treatments with the use of special hooks to disrupt the cell's ability to survive.
And these anchors, pretty much as you would expect for an anchor, they hook things onto certain parts of the cell. And there are lots of these anchors around, and they sit on many important proteins. And as the drug works by disrupting those anchors, the proteins don't get to where they need to go, and therefore the cell can no longer survive.
Professor Bromley says these drugs will be available in the next few years. And there's an added cause for optimism. Aspergillosis, one of the most deadly fungal diseases, which thrives at body temperature and is estimated to cause hundreds of thousands of deaths globally each year, has an important limitation.
For diseases that are caused by Aspergillus, we don't see transmission from patient to patient. It's very rare. What seems to be happening is that we get transmission from the environment. So what that means is that individuals are breathing in the tiny spores that Aspergillus produces, and those spores are getting into their lungs. But that's coming from the natural environment, the soil and the compost heaps that are around people's homes and fields. So what that means is that if we can disrupt the emergence of resistance in the environment, then there's real hope that some of these drugs that we're developing will be with us for the long term.
So we end with a note of optimism as we return to our question: can we stop killer fungi? While some fungal diseases are mild, others are life-threatening. They can be hard to recognize because their symptoms overlap with other common conditions. Without the right tools, diagnosis is often difficult. Not only that, they're finding more welcoming environments both outside and inside our bodies. The growing world population means that we need to use fungicides to protect crops, and this widespread usage has helped fungi learn to evade treatments, which means that we need new treatments. And new treatments are in prospect. Can we stop fungal diseases? Yes, the question is whether we can do it fast enough. This episode of The Inquiry was presented by me, Tanya Beckett. It was produced by Louise Clark, researched by Maeve Schaffer, and the editor is Tara McDermott. The technical producer is Richard Hannaford. This is the BBC World Service, and for the evidence, Claudia Hammond is examining how rising temperatures will affect our health.
Of all the extreme weather that we see, heat is the most deadly. As a result of climate change in many parts of the world, the number of people dying from the heat is on the rise.
The most dangerous parts of heat exposure is the first few days and also the long-term effects.
So what we want to know is why our bodies sometimes react so seriously to high temperatures.
We have very high physiological adaptation to heat, but of course there's limits.
Confusion, dizziness, inability to think very well can induce dying of immune cells.
Our central nervous system collapses, we fall on the floor, we have coma, we have seizures. That's what the cause is going.
The evidence, how does heat affect our health? To listen, search the documentary online or wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Can a 3D printer really help you build a lethal weapon?
You're now putting a potential gun-making machine in every school or home unless we do something about it.
I'm Dan Hardoon, and I've been investigating how 3D printed guns are being promoted on social media. These homemade weapons are now posing a threat to gun control all over the world. Join me for BBC Trending, coming up on the latest world news.
Hamas has offered two relinquishes and next political authority over the Gaza Strip in its official response to the US Gaza ceasefire proposal. Sources talk to protested to Washington after the U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth told a security summit that a Chinese invasion of Taiwan could be imminent. The Chinese Foreign Ministry said the U.S. should not bring the fire. Iran has called a critical report from the UN nuclear watchdog about the country's uranium enrichment politically motivated. The IAEA report said significantly increased production of highly enriched uranium by Iran was of serious concern. President Trump has decided to find an alternative candidate to lead NASA, replacing his original nominee for the job, the tech billionaire Jared Isaacman. The White House said that the space agency's new administrator needs to be in complete alignment with Mr. Trump's America-First agenda. The British government is set to buy thousands of long-range weapons and build 6 new munitions factories. Russia's war against Ukraine has highlighted serious deficiencies in Europe's ability to produce arms. Celebrations have erupted across Paris after the French capital's top football team, Paris Saint-Germain, won their first ever European Champions League final. Revelers headed for the Champs-Élysées. ABC News.
It's the 4th of December 2024. Brian Thompson, CEO of United Healthcare, is fatally shot outside the Manhattan Hotel. 5 days later, police arrest the suspect, 26-year-old Luigi Mangione. He's charged with murder, to which he later pleads not guilty. During a search of Mangione's backpack, police say they find a 3D printed pistol and silencer. Their photo of the alleged murder weapon goes viral on social media, and within hours, experts identify it as the Chairman 1 V1. It's a partially 3D printed model, capable of firing multiple shots without its plastic components breaking. The incident highlights how sophisticated 3D printed firearms have become, allowing anyone to make an untraceable gun at home.
I think it may be the single biggest advertisement for 3D printed guns that we've seen, and it really sounded an alarm across the country that 3D printed guns aren't a problem in the future, they're a problem right now.
I'm Dan Hardoon, and for BBC Trending, I'm investigating how social media has become central to the promotion of 3D printed guns.
This is a new era of weapons trafficking where gun traffickers can actually just get on a massive megaphone and pay for reach.
I've challenged people offering guns for sale on social media. Why are you selling guns?
Don't want to sell, bro. It's my business. Why are you asking questions?
And 3D printed gun advocates who believe this technology should be widely available.
There's no reason not to have the information.
But it isn't just information, it's information being used for a lethal weapon. So what are 3D printed guns? They're often described as a type of ghost gun.
A ghost gun is any do-it-yourself, homemade, unserialized, untraceable firearm.
Nick Saplina is Senior Vice President for Law and Policy at the American Gun Control Organization, Everytown.
They are designed to avoid all federal and state laws on guns, and it gave a market for criminals and other individuals that couldn't legally purchase a gun this easy pathway to get one.
There are different kinds of ghost guns, including DIY kits, which allow you to assemble a gun from existing parts. But 3D printed guns are seen as the biggest emerging threat, because you can assemble a gun from scratch with the right materials and 3D printer.
The materials have gotten better, the cost has gone down, and the ease of access of these blueprints is at a high. Right now, 3D printed guns are going to be, if not already, the weapon of choice for criminals, for militia, for far-right groups in America and maybe across the world because of the ease with which you can manufacture.
3D printed guns aren't new, but over time the technology has become more sophisticated.
12 years ago when we first saw this notion of the successfully 3D printed firearm. It was called the Liberator. It was a polymer plastic model. It fired a single shot. It was touted at the time by its creator, a self-proclaimed crypto-anarchist named Cody Wilson.